Typically, organization is really large. You cannot start everywhere. You start with one group.
ProCognita, Get Agile podcast. How to start LeSS adoption. Interview with Viktor Grgic.
Hi and welcome to Get Agile podcast. Today with me is Viktor Grgic, one of the few certified LeSS trainers. And the topic we wanted to have a conversation about is the LeSS transformation. So how do you start? The customer wants to have those feature teams, and how do you go from that point?
Yeah, so rarely if ever happens that they start with a I want feature team. So they usually say something related to the agile transformation in all kinds of variations. And usually the people approaching me or approaching us is somewhere in the middle of the organization, head of agile coaches or scrum masters or even PMI department, PMO, and they're asking. They have this generic question. So I explore a bit, and I try to get as soon as possible a call with somebody who's actually responsible for the organizational structure, which tends to be pretty high up in organization. So obviously, in order for them to trust to get me engaged in the conversation, they wanted to know a bit more. And they kind of feel that this is actually going to be useful, then they engage in that level.
So what I'm hearing, they're coming with some problem to be solved. I often have this kind of conversation. We had the problem with estimates. I don't know if this is the case in your case, but very, very often the call is start with we have a problem with the estimates, and you end up with knowing that's not an estimate problem. And then you figure out that, we need to change the structure probably. This is what I'm hearing. And I need to have a conversation with the people at the top of the organization or close to the top of the organization. This is what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, kind of. So the pattern is the same, especially the first part, and except the second part is not necessarily a change of organizational structure, which is very likely, but it's more on a level of which problem are you actually trying to solve. So because as you mentioned in the first part, they're typically starting with the symptoms, and you don't want to start with the symptoms and kind of dive deep into that. You want to know what's behind of it, and you get that information by talking to the higher levels. And shall I continue what happens next?
Yeah. So what I'm thinking about is so what you're trying to do is not to to understand the real problem, because what I'm hearing that the people who are coming to you they have their own perspective on the problem. This is what I'm hearing, or.
Yeah, they usually, I'm guessing you recognize that also, usually this head of agile group or whatever, they're being assigned to kind of we need to have an agile coach because blah, 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 blah. We're missing. So this context of that statement is just not good start for a LeSS adoption. So the context within which you start has to be on a much higher level, more organizational. Like, is the problem that you're unable to go to the market faster or respond to what's happening on the market, or is it unable to scale up? Is it unable to coordinate across different teams? Is it this kind of a typical problems? So you want to explore that.
So what is the problem we're trying to solve? And what I'm hearing is the higher you go into the organization, the better answer you have for this question.
Yes, because this is not important only for me, but also for themselves, what to expect from me and what do they actually want to achieve. So essentially asking that question is already part of a coaching, part of the work.
So you mentioned that you get this conversation, unless there was something that happened before having this conversation?
Yeah, usually what happens is that they either too expensive or there's too much, they wanted some kind of a hands, and they already think they have a clear idea what they want.
Just implement this one.
Just implement, and
right,
that doesn't work mainly because the concept agile and what majority of the companies think it is quite different from what we actually see in LeSS.
So first you need to make sure that the people who contact you understand the problem, or how you do it, or you just try to get as quickly to the head of organization as you can.
Yeah, as quickly to having this one meeting with the head of organization, high enough, which has an influence on structure, or has the power to do something about structure. And then I need to link with them really properly. So they have their problem, and I need to understand the problem. And then I give them, don't tell them this is a solution, but I do tell them stories of other organizations with similar problems, and explain what kind of journey they went through.
And we can easily now mention a few. Can we mention a few of your customers you have a story from?
Sure. So the latest one which I'm involved with is Jago. Jago Digitalis. They're kind of like two companies which you can consider kind of like a very connected to each other. It's a virtual bank in Indonesia, and basically startup which scaled up really fast in a matter of a few years. Another one is BNP Paribas. Another one is Société Générale Bank. All three are basically banks.
And just to mention for people who are watching us, Jago is the story we're gonna tell in a few minutes, because the reason for having us sitting on the couch at the same time is Agile by Example conference that is right now happening in Warsaw. Yeah. So hopefully by that moment you see this episode, you can also watch the video from your talk from the Agile by Example. So just to make sure, we'll try to link the video so people has both of them at the same time, at the same place. So anyway, coming back to the story. So you have a conversation with those people about the other customers you have, their cases, and
then there needs to be typically this triggers lots of questions from them. So they ask me at some point, okay, this sounds interesting enough. What's the next step? So the next step, ideally, is the training for a combination of the management, actually different roles from the management that is in that conversation, and a few people from the teams, and agile coach, and different roles combined together in one group. The reason for this kind of an unusual combination of people is because I want them to start to influence each other, which is a very, very common problem. They rarely actually talk to each other about this kind of systemic issues. And already in the training, I want to kind of get it going, and so they get the benefit immediately.
So the training is more for the building the knowledge or building the awareness about their problem, or both?
Both. Yeah, both.
Okay.
Yeah, and so training is obviously organizationally driven because LeSS is organizational design framework, and so we, especially when management is there, we emphasize much more organizational aspects compared to the technical aspects. Yeah. So that's the training is basically done first part. After that, sometimes there is a time in between for them to digest, think about it, discuss internally. But sometimes they really want to move on, and so in that case they do a 4-day, which is a workshop in which they then concretely discuss and make actual decisions with which group to start. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they create feature teams in the group, but with that group they're going to explore further. So they need to choose that. Because typically organization is really large, you cannot start everywhere. You start with one group.
Yeah,
and then make a decision which that way.
So the less idea of deep and narrow, over broad and shallow. So
rather
try to find the spot to start, especially if we have 5,000 people. Don't try to teach all 5,000 people on Agile. Yeah. Just a small recommendation. You can save a lot of money on training this way. Any tips from you for selecting this group? So like if you're working with this company, how do you suggest them to select a specific group or specific area?
Oh, it can be quite complex. That's why we do a feature team adoption map and talk about the product and talk about also several other factors which are contributing to that. But just to mention a few interesting ones. So preferably it should be teams which are close to customer already. You don't want to start with some kind of COBOL backend system, so not a good idea. And not because it's not important. It's important. It's just too large of a step, too difficult. So you want to basically start with the low-hanging fruit, get the fast benefit, but also not make yourself life miserable.
Most likely you're going to have so many challenges, let's call them this way, that starting with the most difficult part of the organization is not going to help you much.
Correct, because it's already difficult with the first group because everybody needs to learn what it is, and if you, on top of that, you don't want to have all inherent complexity.
So you mentioned the product definition, which seems most of the companies, they already know what kind of products they have, and it seems that we have a different, I know we have a different idea in LeSS about the product. So any most common misconception or most common assumption about the product that you want to show during this kind of workshop?
So most common, one of the very common misconceptions is that the product is based on what the customer based on a customer segmentation. So if you have one group of customers or users which has nothing to do with the other one, people assume these are two different products. That's not the case in LeSS. So if those two customers are working on a product which has a lot of shared components, it should be one product. And second misconception is this one is actually really common. And a problem in discussing that is that the word product has been overgeneralized. And so basically, whatever company feels the product is, it's somehow okay to
yeah,
like
especially if you go to bank or to the insurance company. Each insurance is a product. If you go to a finance company, each ETF is a product, right?
Yeah, which is essentially confusing the variations of the product. That's a very good one. That's a very common mistake. Is because you have variations of the same product, they think it's a different product. So you have insurance for like a health insurance. You have insurance for international or local. So is that a different product? Well, usually not. It's just a variation of the same thing.
Yeah, the one just comes to me as you were talking about the other product is like a internal customer, which there is no such thing as an internal customer, but many times you have a team that are delivering something to the other team, which is delivering something to the other team inside the organization, and they also call it product, right? So
yeah, correct. There is a bit of an exception to that. A little bit is that if you work in IT and almost entirely or completely your users are actually internal people, which is perfectly okay. Then you, I'm not sure you should call them customer, but
yeah, they are user, not the
correct,
customer, right?
Correct.
But it's pretty common that you have a, let's say, analyst team or the UX team is pretty popular now, and the customers are the team that is going to implement.
Yes, which is clearly not. Yeah.
All right, so we talk about the misconception regarding the product and the misconception regarding maybe a few words because some people may not have idea and have not heard about the team, the feature team mapping. Or the
feature team adoption map.
Feature team adoption mapping. This was the one the part that I was missing. So first of all, a few words about the tool, and then we will move to misconception.
Okay. So the feature team adoption map, what's so mainly useful is when the people look at LeSS, they typically compare to other frameworks, and when they see how it's supposed to work, they're kind of astonished by. That seems so far away from what they actually have seen, and that it seems like a idealistic and utopia. So
we need to be pragmatic, as Craig Larman is
saying. Yeah. So what happens? There's general assumption that the direction in which you are going and what you actually gonna do first in the first year, let's say, is the same thing. And so in LeSS, we make a very hard distinction between the two. So what typically is being presented is actually an ideal situation, or kind of a perfection, basically. Mm-hmm. And a large company, everywhere feature teams, and there are almost no component teams, and across many, many applications. Well, it basically almost never exists. So you might say, well, so it means LeSS doesn't work. No, you need to make a distinction in which direction you're going and what you're going to do as a first step. So why do I explain that? Is because feature team adoption map is a tool to get you on the journey, to understand the journey, to see the path, the roadmap, as you might say, in organizational improvement, and to also consciously, properly decide what to do as a first step, which is going in that direction. And so that's essentially the purpose of a feature team adoption map. Yeah.
All right, and the biggest challenges that people have with this one. You mentioned one already, so maybe that's a challenge with LeSS, not with the map. Yeah. It's like people are assuming that they need to be perfect from their day one, but there are probably more.
Yeah. So one is mainly when they don't use the feature team adoption map, if I may say, is that I see the problem. They are thinking we need to have a feature teams according to LeSS, and they start basically without much use of a feature team adoption map. They start to for themselves decide what that means, and this usually ends up with still being component teams, but they're calling that feature teams. That's what I predominantly see. If they use feature team adoption map, that's actually already bringing them to a much better situation. But the common problem is looking at when they look at the component teams, they make assumptions what the people may or may not be able to do. In reality, looking in retrospect always, teams are usually much more capable to do than we assume. And so this typically gets resolved if you ask in a very detailed way, like, can you please point out the components that you cannot handle and what would be required to handle them? And it turns out to be actually almost nothing. There's just simply assumption that they cannot handle it, but they actually can.
Yeah, I got a customer right now, and they have a kind of old-fashioned technology, not COBOL, but still like nothing fancy. No one, the assumption is no developers would like to touch it, right? And the amazing thing that is happening right now during the transformation is like the developers, they go and by themselves and decide to do something because they need to be done something there. So they can do it, except the assumption was it is, so old, so unfriendly that no one will do it. And this is exactly, we have a lot of assumption people don't do something, and we'd rather not try to avoid failing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So what I'm hearing that the team adoption map is basically reducing the fear, reducing the risk, reducing the distance between now and the perfect state. This is what you mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. The fear also, typically first part of a training and also whole discussion, people freak out a bit because they're thinking like, now I need to cover everything and it's not possible, it's crazy. Once you go through the feature team adoption map, they actually are empowered. They are the ones driving the change. They decide how much change they take.
And by people you mean?
The teams.
The teams, okay. So because we had just a conversation that the first part was happening with the management mostly. Now we move to the teams. So when was the moment when we moved from the management to the teams?
So once the management decides we're going to start with this group, then that group then gets a training first to be fully empowered to be able to do this, and then they themselves, involving also the management, which is directly related management, not the top management, they do the feature team adoption map.
All right, so we do the feature team adoption. We see what is the next step. Basically, it is, we're not looking for the perfect team. We're looking for the better team that we have. So like my suggestion usually is if you can deliver like 60 or 80% of the backlog by yourself, then it's way better than you used to have. So it doesn't need to be 100% of all the items in the backlog that need to be done by one team. That's, we'll do have to do, so you see that, but you're still going to have dependencies. Some of those dependencies will be outside your organization or the company, right?
Yeah.
So what's next? So we build the adoption map, and anything here just to mention regarding the adoption map? Anything we're missing?
Yeah, so in a adoption map is actually one step out of quite many in the same workshop, you could say. So once we choose to go with one group, it doesn't mean actually permanent choice, because that group also needs to decide themselves if they want to continue. First, they get educated. Once they get educated, then there is some form of anonymous voting and stuff. So because if they don't own it, then it's a bad idea to continue.
What do you mean by own it?
That they need to be fully aware of what the change is all about, and then they need to state that they wish to go through the pain, as you might say, because it's not a minor thing. It's a really major step for everybody.
Which is another interesting part in LeSS. What you do with people who don't want to?
Yeah, so usually when we do what I do voting, and as you know, voting democracy, and it's not like democracy here. So a role has nothing to do with democracy. It's just purely to get a full engagement from the people. And so what happens, and it happens quite often, that we don't have a significant majority. And then then we need to talk about it. We need to expose. Depending on a group and how much safety is in a group, can be done publicly, but also it needs to be done anonymously sometimes because people are afraid to kind of like be against the change. And so anonymously, and we go through those questions and concerns. And typically once we have those, pretty much all the time they prove to be mainly concerns and misunderstandings, and not being against it.
So it's more about the education again.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that's most difficult aspects which make people uncomfortable is what's going to happen to my position, because I'm a blah 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 role, and typically when you flip into feature teams, roles most of them are going away. And so people need to kind of feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. So this is one thing. The second thing is like how do we take care of the quality of the code? How do we take care of the code ownership and all this more technical part? We might go back to those, but before we go back to those, is like I want to see if we went through the whole workshop. So we have a feature adoption map. What is the next step?
Okay. So actually, feature team adoption map is not even the first step. Okay. The first what we today happened in the workshop that we did. So there was one of the first steps is simply getting to know each other better, and because in a component teams it's quite common that the component teams don't even know each other, and so we want to do that. Then we, because they already had a training, they already kind of voted and were prepared to want to go through it, or maybe voting happens in the same workshop. Then we do a ceremonial kind of like a goodbye to the old structure, so in some kind of a funny way. And one of the things is that I let them make the boxes of paper, something really nice. And but before they make it, they need to write their role into the box. And so they spend a huge amount of time to make a very nice, some kind of a box, origami thing. And it's something that we teach them, and spend 1 hour doing that. And then at the end I say, and now please destroy it, smash it completely, because that's what pretty much happens to your role. So so to kind of give a bit of a symbolism what we're doing here, they need to really flip the mindset.
How people react?
Very positive generally.
Oh yeah?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, because
okay.
It's So because they already know it, it's more kind of like a confirmation.
Okay.
And then after that, we go through the feature team adoption map, which is exploring then architecture, which is talking about the definition of done, X is Y about the capability of the team, how far you are, then how cross-component you want to be or can be, and issues that come along with which component, etc. And then after that, there's working agreements. So how do we going to work? Typical question is how do we going to support stuff? Because previously it was pretty clear. And now with the feature teams, how do we going to support? Mm-hmm. And I need to make agreements about that. There's different techniques. Different teams, different groups do choose different techniques. And then after that, they have names for each team that they created. They do self-design team workshop, obviously. And where they decide themselves how the structure looks like with the given constraints. And
again, we're going to stress this out. You're not trying to get every team to be perfect. You're trying to get every team to be better. So what I mean is like you're not expecting that each of the team can take an item from the backlog from tomorrow, right?
Well, when it comes to capability of teams, clearly there is. Some teams cannot take some items. That's pretty much happens. But I do encourage that regardless of that, in fact, because of that, to actually take the items. And because one of the major messages is learning, and they need to be comfortable with learning. So if team says, starts a discussion, or somebody says, but how can they take these items because they don't have the knowledge? Then we need to again revisit the fact that what we're creating here is a learning structure, and not a resource is put in a box. And so this means that that shouldn't be an issue. So if the teams cannot pick up an item, that should be seen as an advantage and not a problem.
Which reminds me about one situation when we're trying to build those kind of teams, and we really build the understanding that it is about learning. But the side effect of this team was that the people started to working in the old-fashioned way. So they had a team, but the work flowed throughout on the old communication channel. So that was kind of interesting thing to happen. Instead of learning, they were still using the name of the new team, but the old structure kicks in. So those pretty interesting things that I've seen.
When that happens, there's a pretty much always a consequence, meaning that the team doesn't deliver at the end. So they are working on their own stuff, and typically it's related to the product backlog items are not really customer centric. That's why it is really, really important.
In this case, they were, but the thing is that the work was flowing through the team. So through the teams. So instead of having one team solving the problem, the person who was going to that person, instead of trying to solve the problem at the team level, they were trying to reach the other teams to the former colleagues that they used to work with, to solve those problems. So there was no so much communication inside the team happening that outside the team. So okay. that's a separate story.
So a more generic response to this kind of a stuff. I usually don't pay attention too much this kind of a dynamic. I pay attention to the effect of it. And so if there is no effect, it's kind of then I would be curious, how do they do that? It seems like some really interesting, highly collaborative setting where there is no consequence for the fact that they are not delivering as a team, but they're working this.
Yeah.
But
that's a longer discussion, probably for the beer, not for the short interview. But yeah. Okay, so we get those maps, we build those teams. We assume that they will be learning. Anything we're missing from the workshop perspective?
So the workshop is then all together usually 5 days, and when I specifically emphasize usually, the context matters. So sometimes go shorter, sometimes, and so at the end you have then what I missed is the 2-day initial product backlog refinement, and this is really important because for one fact is that there is no backlog yet; it needs to be created, and this backlog has to be created together with the teams. Because there is a now huge gap between what people are normally used to. They are normally used to getting not really customer-centric items, but component items. And now we are shifting to is a massive jump from component items to customer-centric items. And so in order to close the gap and to not make it a huge, like a shock, you want to spend 2 days talking about those items so they fully understand what they are. And when teams having a trouble with customer-centric items, and need BAs or whatever to kind of translate stuff, it's mainly because they are not exposed enough and knowledgeable about the bigger context. So they need to go very deep into understanding the product context, essentially.
All right, so what I'm hearing is, first of all, it's not about the feature teams, but it's about solving the problems.
Yeah.
Right, so you need to understand what kind of problems you're going to solve through the feature teams. Second thing is engage the management to this one, build the knowledge, let the team decide, don't look for the perfect solution. And I think that we're missing on this list.
Yeah, the hard work starts actually after the workshop. And because what I just laid out is tested, proven, it works quite nicely and so on. But then once they start, then a trouble occurs. Because the first sprints are... sometimes we say there is a honeymoon period, the first sprints, and that's a role of a Scrum Master to kill the honeymoon as soon as possible. What I mean by that is that they think they're doing really great because it's so excited about this new way of working and stuff, until Scrum Master comes and points out, but did you actually deliver really according to the definition of done? And they happens to be all kinds of stuff not done or skipped or and so on.
So the role of the Scrum Master is to show we're having good time together, but we are not either learning or we're not delivering, which is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so and then pretty fast after already 1 or 2 sprints, they notice what typically happens, they have a carryover items, and the collaboration, they actually still need to learn how to collaborate properly. And so that's the real pain that becomes. By far the most teams, when switch the component teams to feature team, they discover they've never actually been a team in the first place. So this is the painful part. It's not switch between component teams to feature teams, it's switching to being in illusion of being in a team and an actual team.
Working as a team. Yeah. Any recommendation for those people, except for the patience and they need time?
Avoid softening the impact. I see that often. Like, okay, let's for now have each of us separate task, and let's develop, and then carryover should be okay for the time being. This is softening the impact. I would avoid doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's just more painful over a long period of time.
All right. So we get this start pretty defined from the moment people call you to the moment that they feel the pain of working iteratively, delivering value iteratively, all this stuff. And a final advice for the people who want to change, to see the real change in their organization.
So this one I'm clearly biased. So without proper education, don't start. And because we've seen this quite often. Less sounds good. Let's start ourselves. You have to see it as a kind of like a puzzle work. If you're missing major puzzle pieces, it's very, very likely to strand. Even with all the puzzle pieces, less adoptions often fail because it's not easy, because the changing organizational structure fundamentally is really hard. So if you then consciously even choose not to get a training, likelihood of failing is really high.
And still, you need to build all this knowledge. You need to, have those people understand what kind of problems you're trying to solve. So it's not just about knowing the solution, but knowing the problem we're trying to solve, I believe.
Yes.
And this is what should happen on the training, and there's most cases what I see happening on the last training is like this is the problem we're trying to solve. And it's not about, having a solution, just
yes,
like
exactly.
Implement it, and then your life is going to be perfect. All right, so wishing you success on your transformation, wishing you the success with your change. Thank you very much for the conversation, and we're gonna put the link to Viktor's training under the video in case you wanna join him. You mostly do physical one, I believe.
Physical training.
Physical training.
Yes.
Okay, so you need to travel. You need to either bring him to your place, or you need to travel to Hong Kong right now.
Yeah. So I'm happy to travel to Europe or whatever. Yeah.
All right, you heard that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.